Good evening, everyone, and welcome to ELSA Connect. I met Simeran during the annual dinner preparations when we had mock pub crawl session in Bangalore. That was the first time I met her, and since then, I've been hearing about how what the interesting aspect that I found about while talking to Simran was the niche field that she's picked up. It's very rare to find someone who pick something which they truly see that as a pain point, and then they go about building an entire business around it. And I think that's where I connected with the entire entrepreneurship spirit that she has. And when I approached her for the entire conversation around, like, let's have you on Elsa Connect, um, and then the kind of conversation went, and we were like, okay, Ivy also needs to be a part of it, because both of them together have been building an online store called Brag, which is completely focused on girls and women innerwear, which is very niche in India, because you have multinational brands, Indian local brands too, but uh, to have a real focus on the comfort that women need when it comes to the entire innerwear section, that kind of niche domain that had to be built, was something that I found really commendable. So when we started talking about what we need to really discuss in this entire session, um, the interesting aspect that came out was how their journey, taking entrepreneurship, so to say, uh, when after spending more than 15 years in the corporate world, taking that plunge, the process of unlearning and learning new things, the entire journey had to be kind of summed up. And although we won't be able to cover all the aspects and the intricacies, but we thought it would be a good way to kind of segment and have Elsa Connect talk about the process of unlearning. And yep, so I'll have Simran and Ivy give a short brief before we get into the dialogue.
Thanks, Pushkina. I think Pushkina had a nice write-up, but a really quick summary. I'm third generation Chinese, born and brought up in Hyderabad. Spent, of course, 3 awesome years in Sri Ram, where I think my very foundations were shaken up and rebuilt. Went on to do my MBA from IIM Bangalore. Passed out in 2000. Worked for a bit with Procter and Gamble, and sometime in between with Nokia as well. But the bulk of my corporate career has been with various businesses of GE, General Electric. I'm effectively a finance and operations professional. So I've done sort of stints in all kinds of finance, largely focused on the B2B space, infrastructure, capital, water technologies. I was last the CFO for GE's water technology business for their Asia Pacific business, before I signed off in 2016 with Simran to start what we believe was sort of our legacy to not just the world, but to our respective daughters as well. Brag. So, and I think 4 years down, happy to be sharing our experiences, the ups and the downs. I think we've had both. So, over to you, Simran.
Thanks, Ivy, and thank you, Pushkina. So Ivy and I were batchmates, and really the germination of Bragg began in our bitching sessions in the hostel, right? We both smaller than the average sort of bra size in India, and we had such a lot of trouble sort of buying bras that we used to go down to the imported goods, those basement little stores in Lajpat Nagar, and that's where we would buy, our bras. Um, post LSR, I worked for a couple of years. I started off in the hospitality industry before doing my MBA in marketing from the TA Pai Management Institute, Manipal. And since then, bulk of my career has been with Titan. I spent about 13 years with Titan, largely in marketing. 11 of those years was spent as head of marketing for their youth brand Fast Track, which has been very, very close to me as a journey. 2014, I moved from Titan as Chief Marketing Officer of Wildcraft, the outdoor gear brand. And 2 years into that stint was when Ivy and I had sort of just turned 40. We were shaken out of our reverie, saying if you get into your comfort zone post 40, you're never going to get out. So we did. And like Ivy said, we were very clear that if we were getting out of the corporate world, practically at the top of our game, it needs to be something that means a lot to us, more than just more than a job. And I think what has happened over the last 4 years is the germination of an idea that's gone beyond a passion project into something that we believe is impacting young girls and women alike, and hopefully future generations. We've learned a lot, and we hope to be able to share some of these learnings, like Ivy said, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and look forward to sort of questions from you at the end of this. Thank you.
Great. So that kind of has already laid down the foundation for kickstarting the session. And my first question to both of you is, what was that point? You've had such an amazing corporate career. What was that point that led you to decide, and maybe share a bit of instances or examples where you felt that you have reached that point? You mentioned briefly about the comfort zone, but maybe expound a little on what made you take that call and what was that entire build up like?
So, the idea of, sort of brag really was something that Ivy and I briefly chatted about, halfway through going crazy, when I think my daughter had just turned 1 and Ivy's twins were almost 2.5 at that time. That's when the name brag came about. And I remember this feverish discussion because I was running a fever then. And it was a very quick call to Ivy and say, Chin, we need to quit. And this is what we need to do when we quit, right? After that, we kind of got lost, in our respective roles. But somewhere that stayed behind, right? And to me, I realized that, for me personally, at a very, very early stage in my career, I was very fortunate to have found myself in Titan and have gotten a tremendous amount of freedom, to reposition and relaunch a brand and really run with it, right? And got an opportunity to do many things, perhaps much earlier than most of my counterparts did. And therefore, after having sort of built it to a certain stage and helped Wildcraft grow to where it was, the next step was, really, from a 10,000 crore company moving to a 100 crore company back then, to see if one could do the same there, with the intention that, how does one reduce constraints and still be successful in taking a brand? So it was a challenge that I'd set out, and somewhere, I knew at the back of my head that I wanted to do this with Ivy, someone I could trust. Both of us share a common work ethic and set of values. And to me, that was something that was really important. And I did everything I could to make sure that, even though she said, Sim, you quit, it'll take me a couple of months and I'll join you. Literally 2 days later, after I put in my papers, she did the same and she said, I quit. I said, what? You said 2 months? She said, I couldn't wait.
Yeah, those were those last days of December and the Christmas high, I think. But yeah, I think, to your question, the why was we've always, Simeran and I, one of the many similarities that we had was always putting a goal out there, going after that, and then what next, what next, what next. I think it was at Mia's birthday party in August 2015.
That's right.
where Simran's brother Kabir said, you guys are going to do what next, but why is it what next for someone else and not what next for ourselves, right? We're like, we've so in that sense, I think Simran and me, we're both the oldest in our families. She has a younger brother, I have two younger sisters. We've, in a sense, always been the good girls, and we actually got a good conduct award from MG. So, which we're not very proud of, let's be very clear, but we did get that. So we've always been the good girls who've done things the right way. So in a sense, it was like, how do we break free? We've done stuff in the corporate world. Can we do the same by ourselves, really?
Right. So, and just kind of once you were there, how did you settle down on the entire idea of brag? What were the market opportunities you saw? How did you zero down on this particular segment? Because on one hand, it's a very niche field, and typically people, there is a tendency to go after really glamorous ideas or really like I can understand that you had your personal experiences, but what made you really zero down on this idea?
So, to begin with, I had, explored innerwear as a space when I was heading marketing for Fast Track. And at that time, I got very excited about the opportunities that Fast Track could sort of really get into. But through that journey, one of the decisions that we took at the Titan management team at that time, that innerwear would not be a part of that journey, at least certainly not then. So I'd got a sense of the size of the market, and having worked on youth brands on my life, it's working with youth brands has always kept me back in college, right? Everything that I kind of started living vicariously through these brands. So therefore, in 2011, sort of several years before we began, to me, youth sort of seemed natural. And I remember, Ivy, you were talking about, shall we look at a couple of other ideas? And I said, sure. And Ivy, why didn't you tell them about, so Ivy is very passionate about, personal care products, right?
So I think why usually to investors, I think in general, when we meet people, when they talk about backgrounds, a lot of times it's, Simran has done a lot of, let's say, B2C and consumer. You've come from things as boring as credit cards and capital and, medical equipment. So where does this, I think what Simran we have in common is a love for beautiful things. So we see ourselves using or, sort of propagating or just touch and feel. There have been days. So Simran used to design saris as well as sort of moonlighting job. There have been days when the two of us would spend an entire, and we mean literally from breakfast to dinner, let's say out of Mysore Sari Udyog, where we would select material, trimmings, etc. And our respective husbands are like, do you all plan to come home? You all want to set up your own house between the two of you? We would just get lost when it comes to design, good, pretty stuff, beautiful stuff. So I think that's what's common. But I think why the category, some of it maybe are, sort of ELSA roots as well, that this is something that every woman should have. It's part of us every day. Why can't it be thought of differently? What we see out there is either Victoria's Secret, really expensive, or really, a certain typical, the Victoria's Angels, etc. But why not fun, right? So I think for us, really, it came down to, can we do something that's out there, that's difficult, but in a very different way? I think that sort of doing it differently, and at the end of the day, since I'm a numbers person, there had to be opportunity, right? It really didn't make sense. While everyone still said it's niche, etc., to us, while something seemed niche, that to us was a challenge. Can we blow up the market, right? And have people, both consumers and onlookers, look at it much bigger and have it actually grow the way we believe it could.
So, we started off, thinking, for of innerwear for small sized women like us, right? And of course, Ivy brought in the numbers lens, and we said, isn't that a very small market? And through discussion, we said, but every woman is small before she is large, right? And does that then open out sort of 50% of the population out to you, right? And of course, the gap in the youth segment was very evident. But more importantly, I think as Ivy and I started talking about it, it wasn't just the gap in terms of there was no brand, but at a very product level, it's a highly sexualized category, right? Just the word lingerie conjures up sort of, very, very sexual, very hypersexual world, right? And Victoria's Secret has ensured that it is that way. But for younger girls, more age appropriate, and more importantly, a product that really that doesn't necessarily force you to be what others expect you to be, right? And the conventional bra is really inspired by the corset, right? And the corset was developed in the 1900s, the 1800s, in the Victorian age, when men wanted women to look a certain way, right? Sort of 20-inch waist, bust kind of pushed up, flush cheeks because you were barely able to breathe. And nobody has really sort of challenged the category beyond that. And we all know that the bra is the single most uncomfortable garment that any human being has to wear, men or women. But we have kind of accepted that this level of discomfort is going to be a part of our life, and that's what Ivy and I set out to challenge, right? Either products look sort of really sexy but were uncomfortable to wear, or they were super comfortable but didn't look all that great and were only available in a black, white, or skin, right? And Ivy and I started looking at all these things and said, well, why not? Why can't we start from the body and understand comfort and move from there?
Right. So in this entire journey, I am aware of how supportive your families have been, because you've mentioned time and again that almost everyone was like, when are you going to focus on really setting on your journey, and because you're anyway in the consumer space and things like that. So uh, I can understand from the family perspective, but overall in your larger ecosystem, how did you go about bringing people on board? uh, Rather, I would say, instead of how, what were the steps that you took to kind of create your entire ecosystem around you to creatively engage with you and to kind of support you in your journey, because it can get very lonely at times.
I think for me, definitely, I think family without doubt. I think, the respective husbands, not just so much in terms of, let's say, managing while we're out there, but the mental support, right? Bouncing of ideas when we're having crazy days and throwing things at them for them to just stand there and take it sometimes pushing us, also asking us really tough questions. That I think we tend to miss. Supportive doesn't always mean just listening to us, right? Sometimes pushing us, saying that, are you doing it right? Have you really thought it through? I think in terms of the larger system, definitely one of the sort of unlearnings that I had personally, for example, being so used to working in large MNC setups where you have specific functions and people and large team. For me, it was definitely an unlearning in terms of how to do things myself, in terms of reaching out to people, right? You as in larger setups, a lot of times processes are set up, people come to you. For me, the large part of the journey is getting comfortable in what I tell Simran, my extra 3 inches layer of skin that I've grown, in not feeling shy in asking for help. And what I realized was people out there are really, really willing to help, right? And it's not for commercial, etc. Just the interest in seeing us grow, just being excited by the idea, being excited by us when we articulated our vision, and so readily jumping on board, right? To me, that has been one of the sort of the great unlearnings, that don't assume that everyone's out there to just see their good. They are really out there to lend a helping hand. You just have to go out and ask.
So for me, like Ivy, I think it was not just the largest support, from the family that actually pushed me to do this, right? Because they'd been pushing me for, the previous 7 to 8 years, and I was finding one excuse after the other because, you just get comfortable in the corporate world. But the critiquing certainly, literally everyone in the family, I would be battling questions, that would later make me reflect. And some days I would be battling so many questions internally that I would call Ivy and say, listen, these are questions that you and I need to ask ourselves, but I'm dealing with my family asking very fundamental existential questions of how are you guys going to grow this business? What are you going to do differently? Right. And like Ivy said, I think support is not just, go out there and do it, but support is, pushing you and getting you to be the best version of yourself. Right. Um, I think for me, given that I have been in the B2C space for, by then 16, 17 years, it was amazing. And somehow, because over the last few years of my journey in Fast Track, I had talked about lingerie and my dream. The moment, especially my colleagues heard that I was quitting, they said, oh, lingerie brand. So it was kind of almost, sort of understood. But 17 years of having been, having worked with multiple people, it was amazing to see the outpouring of support on anything. Absolutely. One would pick up the phone and say, we need help here. And I think just through our personal networks, the way people open doors for us to learn, from sending us to factories to see how a bra could be made, to understanding fabric, to saying that, look, go to these markets, and Ivy and I set off to China, to someone sort of telling us that, look, one way to do this is go with an empty suitcase, pick up samples from China, come back and launch, right? So, the kind of advice, and support we got and ideas that we got sort of really helped put our thoughts together. And I think it was kind of, I don't know whether it was because we already had developed a network around us, that the support was spontaneous. As we sort of announced that this is what we're going to do, it was sort of coming in from everywhere, sometimes even without asking that, look, we heard you guys are doing this. Why don't you connect with so-and-so?
Right. So now moving to the grim stuff. And I really want to bring out the challenges and the turmoils that people go through when they're specifically launching a consumer brand. And in your case, uh, like you said, the opportunity is big, but it's a niche market, perceived niche market. So let's talk about some of the turmoils and challenges that you went through.
Yeah. I think for me, definitely sort of one of the learnings is in terms of, to really accept and adjust that the setup in a large company, especially MNCs, it just doesn't shrink in size when you run your own business, right? Because what tends to happen, the way that an MNC and a corporate, and the way my sort of DNA was built over 17 years, is very different, because the minute you become a self-run business, it is just not large enough to assume that you give someone a JD which says these are your roles and responsibilities, we'll evaluate you in 2-3 months or every quarter. It doesn't get done, because you're either one of those where over time processes have been set. Otherwise, it is, no matter how great, how smart, you will have to roll up your sleeve and work with the team, because the processes don't support that, right? I think that was one, let's say, for example, of the grim realities in terms of whether it is your support teams, etc., how they look. I was like, it's just basic accounting, or it's just basic financial metrics. We're like, we do tally, we do GST filing, but the rest don't expect that. You have to do, business understanding coming out of numbers, that we don't do, or that's what the look on the faces would say, right? So I think the grim reality is, when you say entrepreneurship, the expectation is, don't think that while you're out to set out a large team, a large business, the amount of sort of hands, how deep you go into the dirt, will continue no matter what. Is one. The other, I think, related to that, in general, people, right? When we go through tough times, and we've had some really awesome people in the team, who kind of bought into our vision, and really was so excited. Every time a mom would call up to say we love Bragg, everyone in the team would jump and scream, because it was one customer feedback is absolutely great. I think for us, the grim was, the times when we had, let's say, our financial crunch, and we had to tighten down and kind of take tough decisions on letting people go because we could no longer keep them on. That was really tough. I think it right, kind of really impacted Sim and me as we thought of it. And, because we had effectively become family. So thinking about what we were doing to them, how we were impacting them, that kind of really hurt. But I think the simple truth also is that, we started out with such passion, enthusiasm, and my numbers in my Excel sheet were just multiplying year on year, but not necessarily seeing it in reality. Your confidence takes a beating, right? We did everything that we said we would. We checked everything on the Excel sheet. Why isn't it happening, right? So I think Sim and me had our tough days. To me, still the light in that dark tunnel was, the good thing was most days Sim and me alternated. It wasn't both of us at the same time. So that helped to some extent. But yeah, there are tough days. I think sort of one of the learnings also, that as you set out, while it seems exciting, your idea just seems like it can't go wrong. The realistic aspect of making sure sort of your backup, and I mean financial backup, as well as, sort of how the family gets taken care of, that's a reality that we all have to be cognizant of and need to plan much longer than what the Excel sheet says.
So I think for me, also picking up from where Ivy began on, is entrepreneurship just about shrinking the corporate structure? I think, we've set up systems and processes in our respective roles over so many years, right? So that's the first thing we came in and did. And it kind of happened very naturally. So we were monitoring, checking, had picked up the phones, gotten the best in our network to come in and support us. Sort of managed to sift through partners, on both the back end and front end. And we were really excited, right? We kind of hit the road running. But I think the first, sign when we needed to put brakes on spending, for example, was when our first collection didn't pan out the way we expected it to, right? And I still remember at that time, it was really hard to figure out that, on one side, we have this creative agency that's just fantastic work for us. On the other side, for example, we have this third-party logistics partner. Both of them have systems and processes and softwares that are supporting us, but they're costing a lot. And I still remember the worry and stress, because Ivy and I were, if we let them go, how will we manage, right? Of course, they were significantly sort of lower cost than when we would sort of work with similar teams, but still, right? And from there to, I would say every 6 months having to cut lower and lower. And I still remember going to one of our investors and he said, how much can you cut on your cash burn, right? If your sales haven't gone to projection, then your expenses can't be to projection either. So what can you guys cut back on? And the first time we went back with like a 10% cut, saying we've done everything we possibly can, right? And we were forced over the next 2.5 years to make successive 10%, 20% cuts. And today, when I look at how lean our operations are, I wonder what prevented us from starting from here, right? And I think that was a huge unlearning, right? In our heads, we were already sizing down, right? While at a personal level, Ivy and I would be picking up the jharu and sort of cleaning our office ourselves. Somehow, I think the corporate structure and the systems and processes in our head were, we sized that down and we thought it was enough, right? Today, it's a team that is, I would say, 20% of the team we entered our first year with. And it has forced Ivy and me to do and learn much, much more stuff that I've had teams doing for me, right, most of my career. But we feel so much the better for it, and so much more confident and able to question people when they come and give us suggestions, saying, no, we've now done it on our own, and we know that what you're saying isn't necessarily right, right? I think to me, the second thing that, really I had to unlearn was And this one was something that I really sort of prided myself on, being able to gather the right team around me, right? And through my journeys, with the various brands, had developed an instinct to, figure out that, if someone really lived the brand and the brand's purpose sort of married their purpose in life, everything else would flow from there, right? You begin with the attitude. But I think we realized perhaps 1 year after sort of getting a team, two critical things. One is that perhaps what we need is not necessarily someone who's experienced the angst of the gender stereotype the way we have, but someone who has fire in the belly, and not this sense of entitlement because they've grown up in the comfort of of their homes where they still live with their parents, and therefore the drive is not as much, right? And this was very different for us because when we started off in our corporate careers, despite all of this, there was no sense of entitlement, right? But we've seen that change. I think the other thing was on diversity. Being a brand that's by the girls, of the girls, for the girls, it was instinctive that the kind of product category we had and the kind of brand and passion that we wanted for the cause, we landed up having 80% women on our team, right? And fairly quickly, and this was not because we wanted women, right? We would interview and they would be right for the job. But I think my biggest learning has been that diversity, for all the right reasons, we need to maintain and have an equal number across, whether it's mindsets or genders or skill sets. We landed up replacing a lot of the women that moved out for various reasons with men very consciously, right? And this coming from LSR and being as fierce as Ivy and I have been, not just individually, but in our corporate worlds, making sure that there is diversity in our teams, in our respective companies. This was a bit of a rude shock, right?
Absolutely.
And I still remember, Ivy and I holding our head, sort of with a cup of coffee in our hand saying, where did we go wrong here? Here are the women who are, so fierce in every other way. But somehow when it came down to brass tacks, there was just Ivy and me picking up the pieces.
I think and that was the big unlearning as well, that unfortunate, and we thought the world had changed. It's been 20 plus years since we graduated, that the world has definitely changed. I believe that still then restricted LSR and a few others, because I think the way out, it's like a sort of pressure valve on the pressure cooker. Almost today, almost every woman's, or a majority of them, still bread earner or etc. of the family. So it is okay if I take a 9 to 5 job, if I don't commit fully, etc. So we already see during the interview, we can already see them setting boundaries for themselves, and therefore the potential that they have, they never hit because they've already put that boundary. It's irrespective of whether they actually have a support system or not, right? So that was a rude shock for Simeran, because while, and I always call out that while we talk diversity, while we say that sort of women leadership programs, etc., a lot of reality finally comes down to how we split the work. And I think we've learned that a lot during this lockdown. And it's a support system that we have. It's unfortunate, but a lot of times finally it is women who pick up the slack at home, and unless you have a support system, just going out there is not really a possibility for every woman out there. But when we see women putting the brakes themselves without even having trying to set up that system, that I think shook Sim and me, and that was one of our learnings as well, that just having a whole set, it's all girls, we're going to do great, it doesn't. There is a mindset that that's still there.
So if I have to talk about the wins, because I can see so many already, but maybe from your perspective, what are the things that you've been really proud of, and what, according to you, have been the wins in your last 4 years?
I think sort of one on the impact side of it, the teams that we came across, not just in terms of our sort of team employees, etc., but also the vendor factories that we've spent time with, whether they are raw material suppliers, our manufacturing factories, the sourcing agencies, etc. I think what I'm really proud about is the fact that a lot of them then sit back and say that, one, y'all don't necessarily have sort of the innerwear apparel background, but y'all come in with clearly saying you don't know, but with the confidence of saying that I don't know, I'm willing to learn, but it doesn't mean I'm a pushover, and we will still negotiate rates, right? So I think that, and also a lot of sort of team members, especially some of them who've not had, let's say, women in their family work, saying that, kind of eyes opening a little wider and saying, okay, there are women out there really like this and not just in the movies. But I think just saying that it can be done, and being able to say, and I think we've had one or two team members who basically say that we believe that we can take better charge of our life now, whether it's, let's say, personally focusing more on fitness aspects, because Sim and I do a lot of that and have been pushing the team every time we get the opportunity, but also relentless when it still comes to professional outcome. So a lot of them coming back, and I think for us to see that they've actually made that change in their lifestyle, in their approach to work, etc., that to me is a big win, that I've been able to influence people in their lives. I think from a professional front, while like I said, my Excel numbers, we didn't hit the way we wanted. The fact that we made competition, including the big names, kind of sit up, have some of them copy similar logos and launch products, and of course take over shelves because they have that much more muscle power. But the fact that we made them do that, the fact that while we were barely out in a couple of stores, having competitors who are much bigger all over India, hearing from sort of sources saying that, our brag heart logo was up there on the board saying this is a brand we need to track. I think those were times when we had sort of goosebumps and were really proud of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. The first time I heard that, we were up on, this brand's chart and board that had raised hundreds of crores, and we were right on top in terms of competition. Another one of the largest innerwear players in the country and one of the oldest sort of started tracking us from the day we launched. It took them 2 years to sort of pick up on what we had done and actually execute it. But these were proud moments. While the Excel numbers weren't going, we knew we were in the right direction. I think to me, other wins were, as we went out in the market, and Indian retailers are some of the toughest businessmen you will see, right? There is this instinct with which they're able to breathe numbers and know whether, this new brand coming in the market, isse paisa banega ya nahi, right? So the fact that we were able to open so many doors across top retailers in 25 different cities in a short sort of span of a year and a half, where other newer brands that were, sort of significantly more funded than us hadn't been able to do, told us that we'd found a niche, right? And they still say that. So these were small wins to me, including now as recent as 2 days ago, when I have mothers calling up and saying, look, my daughter only wears your bra, or my last bralette has kind of worn out and I need a replacement. What it reminds me is that Ivy and I have introduced the word comfort into the Indian woman's vocabulary with respect to bras, right? And this was so apparent every time Ivy and I have had trial sessions with women. And, we've kind of asked them saying, tell us, is it fitting well? Do you want a smaller size? Do you want a larger size? And they say, can you come in, please? Can you tell me how this looks? And we're like, no, how does it feel, right? Forget how it looks. No, I don't know. How is it supposed to feel, right? As women, we've been taught to ignore how we feel and focus on how we look, right? And it really shocked me. And I think because Ivy and I were sort of aware of our bodies and our, and instinctively sort of focused on what was more comfortable, we kind of assumed that everyone else was. But it's such a difficult habit to create, right? And we when we started hearing our customers saying, I love brag because I don't even feel like I'm wearing a bra, right? And some of these were women who started off saying that, your bras are, I feel slightly flattened, and I need, I don't want to look like I'm sagging. And we would tell them that, do you feel comfortable despite this? And they would say yes. I said, then at least start wearing it at home, if nothing else, right? And then they would start wearing it across the day like we do. And it slowly became a habit, right? One of the biggest learnings has been that when you want to change behavior that has such strong cultural nuances and roots in the way generations and centuries of women have been brought up, it's a long haul. But I think that's what drives us to do what we do every day, even now, despite the Excel numbers.
That's awesome. So good to hear the story finally. So, any questions? Please make sure that your videos are on and unmute only when you have questions.
Can I start first?
Sure, Smita.
Hey, so Simran and Chin, it was so beautiful to hear your story. It was really nice, and I think just to see such good entrepreneurship, and well, so the question for you, which actually just asks itself, is: did you ever have a disagreement between the two of you? It would be would be really interesting to hear if you did, because you've been through lots of ups and downs together and supporting each other. That comes through. Was there
Yes.
a tension because you're totally different expertise, right?
Yeah. So actually, Smita, the point is two things: that Simran and I, while we share a common love in terms of approach, I'm like hardcore numbers. Can we get this 1 hour meeting done in half an hour? Versus, I think Simran is, creativity flowing. Let's explore all the ideas. It's blue sky right now. So usually, sort of a lot of people's reaction is, in a way, it's a great combination because you can pull and push and have both of best of both worlds. So which is the good part. I think, to your point, we have had serious discussions, and I would say disagreements in the sense of direction, right? Whether it meant scope, and I would say maybe even to some extent the approach, etc. But because our sense of product was right, at least when it came to product, we were very clear. And finally, at the end of the day, number one, we're a product brand. Two, I think no matter, even if we had our disagreements in, let's say, budget to be spent versus approach and things, and the risk to be taken versus not to be taken, for us, the best thing that held us together is our core values are the same, right? Whether the way we looked at family, whether we looked at, let's say, our work ethics. And when I say ethics, I don't need to say we're ethical in that sense, but the fact that, the way something has to get done, we get it done. If the team is not there, Simran and I have taken, let's say, the overnight bus to Tirupur and sort of done manual stock count of 50,000 pieces ourselves. We've had our warehouse folks say that, okay, we don't expect the sort of directors of the company and sort of women to be here all day. And we're like, no, we will work late till 10 tonight so that we can finish the count. I think it's really our approach and outlook to life is the same. Sort of our skill set and bent of mind is different, but in that sense, we then come back together. Sim?
So I'd like to add one thing to that, is trust, right? Somewhere I think we've both been aware of our strengths as well as our sort of relative weaknesses, which have really been complemented for by each other, right? And that's one of the reasons we came together. So while in the heat of the moment, there are disagreements and sort of debates and arguments about why are we doing this and why can't we do this? And Ivy has this amazing way, sort of very respectfully putting forward a disagreement and saying, Sim, I'm calling this out, okay? We'll go ahead, but I'm calling this out, right? And that calling this out, while I would say, okay, let's go ahead, it would make me reflect later on, right? That is there something that I'm not seeing that Ivy is, right? And I think it's because of that trust, that the disagreement is coming from the right place, right? And it has certainly forced me to look back right up to a discussion that we were having with an investor a couple of days ago. There was something I didn't pick up in the conversation that Ivy immediately picked up, right? Uh, so I think trust is something that has kept us together, knowing that whatever the disagreements are, we're all pulling in the right direction, and we're in it for exactly the same reasons.
I think the biggest thing is the fact that we recognize upfront that we are very different in approach. And therefore recognizing that one of my great learnings the last 4 years is how to be more sort of open to blue sky ideas. And looking at sort of because Simeran is one of those the early adopters that we talk about, right? Whether it's fashion, etc., and stuff. So it's really been that the two of us recognized where really we were different, and therefore keeping an open mind, listening to each other before we put our final opinion out there.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely. And wish you all the best. I'm definitely going to buy Bragg and get both my kids to buy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
Any more questions? We can take at least 3 questions now, keeping a check on the time.
I think Shonali wants to come in. She's muted. So Shonali, you are muted.
Oh, sorry. Hi,
Yeah.
Pushkina. I'm going to ask a question. So, Simran, hi. We met years back at an ELSA event. I don't know if you remember.
I do remember.
Yeah, but I've not met Ivy. So you were mentioning something about, meeting investors, and I was just a little curious because I used to be a journalist and I used to cover startups. So I've met, women entrepreneurs in the similar line of business. And I think one of their challenges was, whenever they'd go to raise money, there was always a challenge, not in terms of maybe the idea or the model, but more in terms of discussing it, because most of VCs were men, and they were very embarrassed to, discuss a subject or a business like lingerie. So
Right.
just want to understand what has been your experience.
So, one of our earliest experiences, I think even before we raised our first angel round, was a conversation with a very successful entrepreneur in the apparel business who was selling not just in India, but in the US, right? And I remember Ivy and I went to meet him in his office in Bombay. And after we kind of pitched to him the idea and the thought of Bragg, he asked us, and he had a 5-year-old daughter then, 5 or 6-year-old, and he asked Ivy and me, I have one question for you. Your husbands are allowing you to do this?
So Simran and I blinked very politely. We finished our water and we're saying, even if he throws money at us, we're not taking it.
So that was one of the first few, but I think other than this very sort of in your face kind of obvious sort of gender sort of specific response, I think Ivy and I are pretty much ignorant of our people sort of, our men kind of looking at us as women, so we don't tend to notice it, right? But I do remember, after we had raised our first round, we met one of the women who was part of an angel network that we had pitched to and we had not raised money from, right? And discovered some common friends, and she met us and she said, guys, all the men at the top of our angel network just they couldn't understand what you two were saying. And she said, me and 2 other women were vigorously nodding our head at the back of the room to try and convince them that, look, there is a real problem these 2 are out to solve, right? But that's just it. When you try and explain that it's uncomfortable to wear a bra, men have no starting point to even begin to understand it, right? And it didn't help that a couple of startups before us in the innerwear space hadn't delivered to investors' expectations. If they don't understand it, you don't get the money because they don't see it, right? And this was a very specific product where you needed to. Having said that, there were enough men who opened their eyes, asked many more questions than the women on their teams, took time to understand it, and then came back and said yes. And invariably these were fathers of young girls, right?
Nice. Yeah.
So it's really interesting because they're putting themselves in their wives' shoes, they're putting themselves in their daughters' shoes. And a lot of these men would go back and ask their wives and their daughters, and then would come back with more questions, and we knew that they were getting involved. Right?
Involved, yeah.
So it is heartening to see that. But I think about the rest, Ivy and I were we didn't notice it because we haven't trained.
But I think to your question, see, the reality is not going to change. We know, like I said, 20 years on, and we're still, that gender balance is still not tilted significantly. To me, the learning therefore was that how do we pitch it differently, that while the given is that they will never truly understand and experience the product gap themselves, right? And therefore our goal is to raise money. How do then we pitch it as a product market opportunity and show them the market opportunity, because that's what they will finally then connect to, right? At the end of the day, they're not going to wear bras. And then how do I then translate the need into numbers if that's what they understand? So that was like, as let's say a year, 2 years down into our pitch, our tone changed, as we assessed, let's say, understanding of product, because they didn't have a young daughter at home, versus how then we pitch to them, because that's the reality we have to accept, that are going to be much fewer women investors versus men.
Who invested in you? I mean, just if
so we have, it's basically a clutch of angel investors that have largely come on board either through our networks, or we also have a large bunch of them coming in through the Chennai Angels.
Okay.
And also the Let's Venture angel platform that's based out of Bangalore.
Yeah. No, I think, what I've seen also coincidentally is that a lot of these entrepreneurs who ended up raising money have male investors. So there will always be, like you say, an angel pun unintended who will, kind of see value and see the market opportunity and, kind of remove that whole gender lens or the biases or the embarrassment. And in fact, if you see Richa Carr's stories, Ivame or Buttercups, eventually they did end up raising money from male investors. So
absolutely. Yes.
I think that will slowly change now, because there are more and more people also getting into this space. There's the rise of so many private label brands and also.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, just keep going. don't let that deter you.
Thank you.
I'd like to come in.
Okay, Vandana, after you.
No, okay. Thank you. I think that's been, it is so wonderful to see a friendship blossom in, the corridors, I would say. I don't know whether you were both in the same class, but from
class,
LSR and going through the ups and downs and everything. So I think, God bless. I think that's one of the most beautiful things to happen. Also, they say never mix friendship with business. I think the two of you have defied that. So I think that's amazing. I also want to, at this point, give a big thank you, because I know Sim and I were both supported when we had the Coorg floods, and you were one of the first to come forward and say that you would, virtually at your cost, give, the undergarments for the girls who were sort of, homeless and everything when Coorg happened. So thank you for that. Simple question: how did the name BRAG come about?
So BRAG really is, a culmination of the vision for our brand, which is, to get girls onto the street and out of the closet, including their innerwear, right? And I think it's about sort of being able to fearlessly express yourself. And I still remember, well-wishers told us that, look, for a women and a young girls innerwear brand, don't you think the word brag is a little too negative, right? Shouldn't you choose, something that's a little milder and softer? And that was the day when Ivy and I firmed up that brag it is, right? It is so sort of acceptable for men to brag. But we also know as women, and we're both known as aggressive women in our previous corporate avatars, right? That you get branded as such. It never mattered to us because it, kind of, it was water off a duck's back. But we do see that, women we have mentored around us in our teams and outside, saying that we're put down when we stand up and say something, and we're told that you need to not be that aggressive. So while it does have a negative connotation, I think it's a question of acknowledging, bragging to yourself, and if you choose to, bragging out there, right? If you believe you have something to say, you have something that you're proud of, inside you, around you, things that you've done, fearlessly brag.
Beautiful, beautiful. And in fact, you also, when you mentioned that it's not about how you look, but about how you feel, I think that's a fantastic statement to have made. And I think every woman should actually, young, old, whatever, should definitely go with that. Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you.
Vandana, one other part linked to brag, we consciously made it a point that our bras shouldn't look like bras, something that we're embarrassed that even if it peeps out by mistake, it's not something that, someone would come and say, oh, something is showing, tuck it in. And we've had that happen to us so many times, right? So can we look like just another layer of clothing so that if it shows, and that's also what brag is, right? It's just another garment. What's there to be embarrassed about? People don't say the word bra. And Ivy and I would walk into meetings, not just saying bra hundreds of times, but so kind of touching ourselves and saying, this lift and this size, and all the men would be turning red, blue, and green. But we've been unfazed. If we are not going to verbalize what people feel are uncomfortable and have the gumption to say it, the discomfort and the embarrassment will remain.
So I completely agree. In fact, I'm just going to quickly jump in, not a question, but to say that a friend of mine yesterday was wearing your bra as a sari blouse. And I looked at it and I said, I have to go out and get some of them to do exactly the same. Because it's so awesome. They look so great, and, they're comfortable and they fit well. And, everything's just, it's just rethinking it in your head, because you don't walk around with a tank top and not worry about it. Right.
Correct.
And I have walked around, in a bra, and a sari, but then my mom freaks out. So now I just tell her, no, it's actually a sari blouse. It's not a bra.
So you're absolutely right, Yumna. Our products are designed such, even at the last, ELSA dinner at the Taj West End. With my sari, I was wearing a brag bralette, right? And when people asked, that nice sari blouse, I just said, thank you. And it's just that, it's the way you look at it. It's the way if you're embarrassed about showing it, people will pick up that embarrassment, right?
Yeah.
And the fact is, Victoria's Secret and every other lingerie brand hasn't done anything to help it, little bits of lace, little bows, little trims that, calling it the intimate wear category. We consciously said, no lace, no bows, none of the trims. If we have to go to another extreme to tell people that a bra can be this way and it's not something that you need to be embarrassed about.
Yeah. Fantastic. I love that.
I really haven't met both of you, but today's story, it's so close to my heart. Whatever you said, I mean, Vandana asked you the question, and the name, because Simeran, the way you said it, I can imagine, because it's something which you also believe in, and it's there. And I grew up like that. I would not let my mother, who used to wear, extremely scanty blouses, and I would feel, why is it peeping? And I used to feel embarrassed, and I came from a school of thought that it never be shown. But, the way you said it, and as I've over the years also let go, it's beautiful to have a product like that. And more importantly, I just feel your journey has been, I think, having so much of fun. The product has to be good. There's no question about it. Forget the product, but the bonding is amazing. It's such a joy to hear both of you that, forget the brag is beautiful, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to buy one and, see how it feels. So thank you very much. It's an amazing.
Thank you.
Sharing by you all, and your unlearnings are more special for me. I love each of them.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So I think with this, we're going to close the Q&A and we can continue with the banter, but this is also an indication of us going off YouTube.
Hey, can I ask one quick one? I missed a little bit.
Sure.
I don't know if it's a repeat.
Only because it's you.
No, quickly just asking, any regrets leaving large companies like Nokia and Titan? Or...
None whatsoever. I mean, it's a whole different world out there, Madhulika, from the comforts and confines of a corporate world. I don't think we would have learned as much as we have in the last 4 years if we had stuck to our roles, right? Because there's so much around you that you take for granted. It's just been a vertical learning curve, and I would not give this up for anything.
I think the thrill of creating something, it's an addiction. I think I would say once an entrepreneur is, at least for me, is going to be always an entrepreneur. I think, as Simeran and I speak, while Bragg is going through ups and downs, we are doing some stuff on our own as well, in terms of utilizing, I think, our current skill sets and things, and branching out there. But I think it still will be, in that sense, entrepreneurship where, whether it's consulting, advising others, etc. The point is we want to be on our own, create something from there as well. So yeah, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur.
Thank you very much, Ivy. I mean, I like the way Sim called you Chin. So I don't know whether we should call you Ivy or Chin, but both are wonderful. It's usually Chin. All right, so we stick to Chin. Thank you, Sim and Chin. That also rhymes. It's been a wonderful session. We're closing from Pushkina.
Yeah, when we were thinking about unlearning, I didn't realize that we we're going to explore so many aspects, and I'm so glad that we did this session. And power to you, girls, man. Thank you for inspiring so many other women out there, and not just women. I think everyone out there with your story. And yes, thank you for coming on ELSA Connect.
Thank you so much,
for giving us an opportunity,
Vandana, and the entire ELSA Bangalore. I can't tell you, it has been a tough couple of months for us, as it has been for everybody, personally as well as professionally. And to feel this kind of love and reassurance feels really good. It's really made my day. Thank you.
Thanks. You girls just rock.
You girls just rock.
Absolutely.